Good evening, 49er faithful. Welcome to another episode. Very excited to be covering the 49ers' second preseason game. 2 down, 1 to go. Thrilled to have my guest joining me today, Rohan Chakravarthi. Rohan, how are you doing this fine Monday evening?
Doing great, man. I already see the chats buzzing. Exciting show. Excited and always a great time talking with you. How are you?
I'm very well. Thrilled to have you back. Very excited that the chat is always alive and well on this channel. I got to say, I'm very grateful for that fact. I am always pumped to see the positive energy that comes from the chat. Always love bringing in the topics that they bring to the table. I mean, you and I were talking about that before the show. We're going through our list of stuff, and it's like, yeah, well, in addition to that, there'll be some people in the chat who are like, hey, Rohan, how about this? Hey, Rob, how about this? Like, what are your questions? What do you want to talk about? Because that's what keeps it interesting, right? You and I could come up with all sorts of things to cover, but when you get that off the cuff, great question that someone throws into the chat, there's just something cool about that.
That's the best part about shows. Just going that back and forth when you don't expect it, but you get the question and you just go straight up on it. That's my favorite part, at least.
Mine as well. Want to celebrate those that are here in the chat because I am grateful for your contributions. Gold-blooded dropped in to say hello. Swan Song, one of the sneakerheads here on the channel. Raphael 562 Niners always coming in to say what's up and say what's up to the sneakerheads here as well. Sean 951 Niners coming in. Archie coming in repeatedly to make his statements. We got Darren Worthington. We've got Thomas Luttrell, Texas Niners coming in, a rare appearance from the Texas Niner. Roy Depler, not a rare appearance, just a rare live appearance. Roy Depler coming in. We've got Hector, 2JZ, all sorts of people. Kevin coming in from Scotland. Good to see you. All right, let's get into a little bit of the topics. Obviously, we had a game on Saturday. That's what everybody is excited about. Sure, it wasn't the starters. Sure, it was all backups and third stringers. But we did walk away with a victory. Leaves us feeling good. Hopefully pumps us up about the depth of this roster, which we've all been talking about this entire offseason. What were a couple of the takeaways that you had from this game, either positive or negative, after watching the Niners take on the Vikings on Saturday?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll start with the boring stuff.
I like the boring stuff.
Yeah, let's look at the starters that played, that will start for the 49ers, or at least are projected to. Aaron Banks and Spencer Burford on the offensive line both played, and it seemed like they had fairly good games. Burford, I don't believe, allowed a pressure in the game, which was good. He had a fairly solid performance in the first game and backed it up with another good performance. And I think Banks allowed one on a stunt, but I'm also not as concerned because when you have the real starting lineup there, I think that they'll be a little more coordinated on those stunts, be able to pick it up as opposed to having Justin Schuh on your left side and then Colton McKivitz, who's Keaton Sutherland on your right side. And so to me, it was a good sign to see both of them play again. No fatigue from either of those players. They're continuing to get all the reps that they can get before the game one action. And then on the other side, Javon Kinlaw, he was the big name that came in. Last week when I broke down Javon Kinlaw's performance, I said it's great that he's available and that he's being able to play for the amount that he played after a pretty extensive playing time in training camp. And then you saw that carry over. But last week, while the performance on stats was not there, you saw his impact in this game. He was being double teamed, sometimes even triple teamed, and he was able to eat it up while also getting in for that nice sack in the second quarter. Played nearly 2 quarters worth of action, and it's great to see that from Javon Kinlaw after coming off injury and being limited over the last 2 off seasons.
I have to agree with both of those observations, and in particular, the Javon Kinlaw one was right there at top of my list as well. Seeing Javon Kinlaw out there looking like he's healthy makes me believe that he may absolutely wreck shop this season. Just seems to have a different body, just a different body than someone his size is supposed to have. When you watch the six-pack that he's rocking at 300 plus pounds, it's just sort of absurd to have that chiseled of a body at his weight class. If he's able to eat up double teams, what type of a season can Bosa get into? If he's able to be as stout in the run game as DJ Jones was, how special can this defensive line be? And if he's not double teamed, can he finally have a season wherein he is statistically impressive, racking up some sacks out there? I'm taking the positive of him continuing to be out there, rack up significant reps, and be out there continually, not having to take considerable days off throughout the process. Early on in camp, being regimented a little bit, but it seems like a full go at this point. Has that been your observation as you saw him at the tail end of those in-person visits? Was he as impressive in the practices as he has been, in being present on tape in the games?
I think so, to a fault. Like Kinlaw, during the 14 or so practices in training camp, the one thing that I noticed for Kinlaw, the speed was back. The pure athlete of Kinlaw was back. And it was impressive to hear that he's only 292 pounds, and he's the most massive human that I've seen. Like, look at that. Like, the only guy that's comparable, like Ark Armstead 6'7" and all, but the only guy really that's comparable is Trent Williams at his huge silverback frame. So Javon Kinlaw being 292 is crazy. But going back to the actual performance, when you talk about Javon Kinlaw, apart from the 2 days where he took a rest, he was there, at least in the towards the tail end of camp. He was there, he was active, and he was getting there. While he is raw in terms of his talent in pass rushing, D'Amico Ryans alluded to that. There were several plays where, he would beat a guy like Aaron Banks. That was kind of the battle in training camp, him versus Aaron Banks. One of his more refined moves, in my opinion, is his long arm. Because he's got the strength and the speed to push back offensive linemen and just get into the quarterback's headspace through that move. I'm interested to see, does that move carry over to real games? But he was looking better as camp progressed, for sure.
Very excited to see what he can do out there in the regular season. Very excited to see if he can hold down that starting role for a considerable amount of the regular season and stay healthy. Another one of those takeaways for me is that going into camp, I thought there were a lot of roles that were unsettled. 2 games in, it feels to me that and this is something I want your opinion on to see whether I'm imagining this or whether I'm onto something here. It seems as if all the starting roles on this team are currently filled, and that barring injury or a significant leap from someone that we have yet to see yet, that all of the starting positions are locked down. You got Samuel Womack coming in, grabbing the nickel spot, so much so that you're able to release Darquez Dennard. Huff has locked down that safety spot opposite of Jimmy Ward, such that Jimmy Ward is out with injury, and we're not even really talking about the fact that leaves Huff out there on that island with someone who isn't as experienced of a safety there. Ebukam seems to be holding down the edge opposite of Nick Bosa. That's one where I could be convinced that it's still, quote unquote, open, but feels like it's locked down. And the incumbents are staying at the offensive line positions that they started out. Some of that could be, lingering injury concerns. If Brunskill were completely healthy, would we have gotten a true competition at center? Most likely. But with the way in which it's shaping out, seems like Jake Brendel is going to hold that down. Aaron Banks at the left guard spot. And as long as, and then you have Burford at the right guard spot. And as long as McGlinchey's healthy, he starts at right tackle. So that surprises me. And then maybe technically the wide receiver 3 spot is up for grabs, but my guess is that Juwan Jennings and his run blocking ability keep him in that wide receiver 3 spot to begin the year. Are you with me that all of these camp battles have sort of bubbled out to be just not nothing, but that the incumbents are typically grabbing most of these spots, or in the case of Sam Womack, someone coming in as a rookie and grabbing it? Or am I wrong? Are some of these spots very much still up for grabs?
I wouldn't say that like many of these spots are up for grabs. The one point that you allude to that is important is injury, right? You have Mike McGlinchey who's out. Charvarius Ward has not returned to practice either. And then Jimmy Ward is likely, or not likely, but at least in danger of missing week 1 with his injury. So you have those 3 big injuries where you might have somebody fill in. And the last one that nobody has talked about yet, that we expect him back for week 1, but hasn't really gotten healthy yet, and that's Elijah Mitchell, who has suffered a hamstring injury of his own. Shanahan said he expects him back after the Houston game, and we'll see if he ramps up and plays week 1, which is the expected situation right now. But the one thing that I'll talk about, which there was a little bit of talk today from one reporter, that being obviously Grant Cohn, that Jason Poe has been sprinkled in the mix at the left guard position with Aaron Banks. Now, could that position be up for grabs? In my opinion, Aaron Banks is the better player from what I've seen. I think Aaron Banks is a little more refined technically, while Poe has obviously the strength and the speed. Like, he has the traits, but I think that Banks is a little more technically refined and also is more consistent, whereas Poe sometimes wavers where he's really good in pass protection, really good in run blocking, but maybe not always both. And we've seen that at times in the games. Obviously, you see what you have in Poe. He is obviously undersized as well for a lineman. I think what I commented on yours and Jack's show, I think the situation is more so because Banks has been playing a ton. Him and Burford have been the two most played players because they've played every day in practice. They haven't had a rest day, and they've played a ton of snaps in the games as well. So it could have been just a rest day for Banks without it being declared as a rest day for Aaron Banks. That's what I'm alluding to. But I think tomorrow and going into Thursday will give us a little more content for sure.
Yeah, I'm with Texas Niner talking about the size and the fact that he's a small dude, but Poe absolutely brings it. Agreed. You could also see this as a situation where the 49ers are starting to look at those last couple of spots on the roster and potentially view Poe as someone that other teams might covet because of his sort of physical freak nature and him just being an exciting prospect where you don't know if he's going to turn out to be something special down the road, but he has the physical skill sets that you look for that differentiate him from some of those other players at the fringe of the roster. So potentially the Niners are exploring, hey, what do we have here? We're getting him in with the one so that we know whether it's worth holding a roster spot to bring Poe aboard or whether we're willing to risk allowing him to go through that waivers process. Because he does strike you as that type of player that a team that's not as talented as the 49ers would take a swing at, because you never know what he could turn into in future years.
Yeah, exactly. And the thing is, you talk about Poe. I think this is a nice place to make a declaration. It's a show. Everybody's buzzing. I've been thinking about this for maybe the past 2 weeks since Poe came on my radar after a struggling first week, but a good bounce back second week of training camp. Jason Poe might be my eighth player to make the 53-man roster on that offensive line.
Whoa.
I think there are 7 locks. Colton McKivitz and Daniel Brunskill, along with the 5 starters. Those are my 7 locks. There's an 8th guy. People thought it could be Jordan Mills. People thought it could be Nick Zakelj, our 6th round pick. I think it's Jason Poe, because Zakelj right now, he comes from an unknown school. I think you can cut him and potentially get him off waivers onto the practice squad, similar to how you did with McKivitz. It's very interesting because they were both moved to a different position and then cut by the team and been on the practice squad for the past 2 years. And so Zakelj might have like a McKivitz type of thing. Jordan Mills was playing good in training camp, struggled during the game. And the big thing about Jordan Mills, it's not really that he struggled that really stood out to me. It's the lack of athleticism that stood out to me. And while his pass protection is valued, the lack of athleticism isn't something that you want to see from the system. And I don't think the 49ers covet that either. Hence why they benched McKivitz. Hence why Daniel Brunskill has also played at tackle at times. I think they've got their 2 guys on the outside in those 2 players. And Mills might be a practice squad player or might not be on the team overall. That's my big prediction kind of going into the 53-man rosters talk.
I like it. And then are you sneaking Jalen Moore onto the roster through IR in that case?
That's the one thing. That's the one thing. It depends on what the 49ers want to do with Jalen Moore. I think you could see Poe get cut, Moore get that 8th spot, and then move Moore to IR and then Poe back. Or you could see the 49ers maybe even carry 9 and have Jalen Moore be a spot where some other positions might take an extra cut. Potentially the next topic on our list, the quarterback position.
Yes, indeed. And I will say that it's going to be a highly fascinating cut down day for the 49ers. I mean, this is just an unbelievably stacked roster at several different positions where I think it is going to be something that you have to closely monitor. Before we do get to that quarterback position, I do want to talk specifically about one offensive lineman, because we talked a little bit about Mike McGlinchey, but those in the comments have brought it up as well, in that they are concerned. I saw a couple that I want to bring in here. All right, here we go. Something up. Texas Niner coming in. Something is up with McGlinchey. Says concerned about the guy. Could be his leg isn't back yet. It does seem as if they are at least moderately unrelated in that we're talking about the injury last year that held him out was the torn quad. And in this case, you're talking about a knee injury. So obviously proximity, they're right next to one another, but it doesn't seem as if the two injuries are related. But Rohan, have you heard anything to this point that leads you to believe McGlinchey will or will not be ready to go by week 1?
There is one thing that I've heard in this entire process from Kyle Shanahan himself that makes me a little worried. Last week, a note that like everybody heard that McGlinchey is going to miss Thursday's game and Colton McKivitz will start. But
Right.
people didn't understand or hear maybe the reason why. McGlinchey received a PRP injection, I think it stands for platelet-rich.
Yeah, platelet-rich something.
Yeah, plasma injection. And the recovery for those are normally 4 to 6 weeks. Now, McGlinchey, they've said that they're going to test him out next week. But if you're talking about a 4 to 6 week recovery and McGlinchey's in week 2, I think that puts his week 1 status in jeopardy. And I think if he is healthy, even if he hasn't practiced, they'll throw him in there. But I think right now, his week 1 status might be in jeopardy, which is why they benched Colton McKivitz yesterday instead of playing him, because they are that comfortable with him because he is likely going to be starting at right tackle week 1, and they're going to play him with the starters this week.
That is something to monitor there. It's definitely something that it makes you wonder, just because you have 3 new positions already being broken in, and now you're going to take out the right tackle position as well. I have some faith in McKivitz and his ability to put forth a solid effort, in particular in spot fill-in duty. But when you put him next to 3 as of yet unproven candidates along the offensive line, it does make me a little bit worried for Lance. Thankfully, we're playing the Chicago Bears week 1. John B coming in to say, Rob, McKivitz and Burford on the right side isn't a terrible thing. McKivitz has been playing well. I have to agree with that. I think McKivitz going from where he was released from this roster and then brought back to where he was able to contribute against the Rams and what he has been able to do so far this offseason, McKivitz seems to be a very valuable piece along that offensive line.
I think I agree too. And if we're being objective, Daniel Brunskill is the guy who many obviously project to make the roster, but Colton McKivitz has been the 6th best offensive lineman behind the 5 starters. He, in my opinion, is the 6th man on this team right now. With Brunskill's injury history, he had knee tendonitis, now with a hamstring injury, and also he's had one of the worst camps of any 49er player, in my opinion, throughout. I think that if Brunskill had a better camp, it would have been his center position to lose. But he has struggled not only with the snapping issue, but also just in general. He has struggled at times. He hasn't really shown too much. And I think McKivitz has taken over as that 6th guy, but they also will kind of play different roles, right? I think McKivitz is your first swing tackle on the roster, like Jalen Moore was last year for a period of time. And then McKivitz took over at the end of the year. And I think that both him and Brunskill can obviously play guard, where Brunskill has more experience on the right side, McKivitz has more experience on the left side. So you've got your kind of dual threat ability kind of from your offensive lineman with those 2 guys. And then obviously Brunskill's got the ability, not the ability, but at least the experience to play center.
Yes, it does seem like the 49ers have a good set of backup linemen in there, in particular, if they're able to sneak Jalen Moore on through one of the injury lists and have that as a 9th offensive lineman. That would actually work out pretty well for the San Francisco 49ers, in my estimation. Before we do move on to that quarterback conversation, Charles Alt, one of the sneakerheads here on the channel, comes in with this one. Rob, what's going on with Jimmy Ward? We signed a guy to cover for him for 1 game, or is this worse than what they are saying? My instincts tell me that Jimmy Ward's injury is significant, but one that he will be able to bounce back from. But honestly, that's just me picking it out of the ether. What have you heard so far as to whether Jimmy Ward's injury may keep him out of week 1 or beyond that?
Yeah, I mean, we've heard, right, that Jimmy Ward's is in danger of missing week 1, but I'm not that worried because right now the 49ers even if he misses week one, the 49ers are obviously carrying him on the 53-man roster. I think their safety group is somewhat intact, be it somehow Taylor Hawkins wins the spot from Tarvarius Moore, which I think is highly unexpected now. I think Moore, especially with that last game, has shown enough that he is that safety number 4 on the team. I think that you have your 4 safeties. You have George Odom, Moore, and then the 2 starters in Hufanga and Jimmy Ward, with
Right.
Hawkins being a practice squad player. I think while Ward might be out for week one, they've got the replacement for at least a backup level player in Dante Johnson, but also have confidence in Tarvarius Moore and George Odom, both of whom started this past game and looked pretty well. So I think that, yeah, like you said, it's a hamstring injury. They're not going to risk it because you really have your first big game in week 3 against the Denver Broncos. So I wouldn't even be surprised if he missed the first 2 games. But overall, I think that Jimmy Ward will come back and safety tandem will come back healthy and be one of the better ones in the NFL.
Random question for you that I haven't given you any time to prep for, and maybe you've thought about, maybe you hadn't. Putting you on the spot here, but does the Barnacle make the initial 53-man roster? Does Dante Johnson make this 53-man because of the versatility that he brings, or do the 49ers believe that he's the type of guy that they can cut and bring back after week 1 and use that to their advantage?
Yeah, I think he doesn't make the initial 53 just because he's the veteran.
Yeah.
Remember, other players on the roster have under 4 years of service. This is one of the youngest groups, so they have under 4 years of service, meaning that they could be claimed on waivers if they are cut. The other players, Tariq Castro-Fields, Diamador Lenore, Ambry Thomas, I think that all of them have Ambry Thomas has struggled, but he's a 3rd-round pick. The other 2 have flashed as well. Diamador Lenore obviously had a really good game. And if you're talking about cornerbacks, you have Mosley, or Charvarius Moore and Mosley, your 2 starters. You've got Womack, that's 3. Then you've got the 3 I just talked about in Lenore, in Ambry Thomas, and then in Tariq Castro-Fields. That's 6 in itself. The 49ers carried 6 last year. I don't know if they can afford to carry 7, and I don't even know if they want to carry 7. Ambry Thomas currently has a knee injury. Maybe the 49ers view it, look, you're struggling right now. You have a knee injury. Why don't you take this time to get healthy? Take this time to get your mental correct. Put him on IR for the first 3 weeks or 4 weeks or how much ever it costs. And then they elevate Dante Johnson or use him as one of the veterans they elevate every week.
Yep. That is absolutely how I would view this setup. I would totally try to sneak Ambry Thomas onto one of those injury lists just to give him some time to get right. You obviously want him on this team long term because he does have the talent. You saw it flash last season, but he is clearly struggling at this point in time. So why not allow him to continue to struggle on IR as opposed to eating up a valuable spot? Because again, to your point, it seems as if it is too early to allow him to flame out and allow some other team to come along, swoop him up and reclaim him, bring him back to his glory of last season. Want to bring this in. John B coming in, sneakerhead here on the channel, says, Rob, 49ers probably signed him, talking about Tayshaun Gibson coming in for Jimmy Ward to put pressure on Tarvarius Moore. He's been very inconsistent this preseason. I wanted to bring that up because I have seen some inconsistencies from Tarvarius Moore, but I do view this edition of Tayshaun Gibson as a camp body, and unless the injury to Jimmy Ward does linger for, say, the first quarter of the season, I wouldn't expect him to make the 53-man roster. But what have you seen from Tarvarius Moore? Are you impressed so far with what you saw in camp versus what we saw in the games and the slight improvement from week 1 to week 2 in the preseason?
So in camp, Tarvarius Moore, his speed was the thing that kind of popped out. It seemed like it was back to normal in a way. Now, the question about Tarvarius Moore has never been about his speed or his athleticism. It's more been about his instinctual ability. Can he fit well in the run? Can he take good angles to the line of scrimmage? We didn't see that much in the first game. And I know he got burned for the touchdown. I personally don't blame that on him because you're going to safety against a receiver in the slot. It's a tough matchup in itself. But Moore didn't have a great game in the first game. But in the second game, I thought he played fairly well. I thought he fit when he needed to fit. I thought him and Odom both played well. And as for the signing of Tayshaun Gibson, I think I agree with you in that he's a camp body. Remember, Kyle Shanahan has stressed the importance of staying healthy and that the 49ers play 3 games in 12 days, especially with today coming off coming off an off day and then practicing today. What have the 49ers suffered over the last couple of times that this has happened? Jimmy Ward's injury was a result of having an off day and then going back to practice. Several injuries have been like that. And so you don't want to overstress players coming off a flight, coming off a game, especially when you're depleted at the position. Because right now the 49ers are only practicing with 3 safeties before Gibson, with Taylor Hawkins, Tarvarius Moore, and George Odom. Because Dante Johnson has a rib injury right now. He's not healthy. Quantrez Knight plays a little bit in the at the safety position, but he also needs to play in the slot because they only have one other guy in Womack and Lenore at times as well. So you don't necessarily have enough bodies. And I thought the Austin Mack cut was expected, given that he was injured, not going to play anymore in the preseason, which means that his value wasn't going to be there because he's not making the roster. And he also wasn't that impressive. He had a bunch of drops in training camp, a couple of drops in the first week as well.
And we do have some cuts coming up tomorrow. The 49ers have to cut another 5 tomorrow, but it is really that last roster cut that I think I am cued in on, because these first couple of cuts, you can't tell. Are they going to cut one of the veteran guys that they have a handshake agreement with that says, hey, if you're not going to be a starter here, we'll cut you early so you can catch on with another team, much like I would expect happened with Darqueze Dennard? Or are you looking at someone where you don't think they're going to contribute to the snaps as you're looking to divide them up for your team because you need to keep your players healthy? And so these first cuts feel like they are hard to predict, but that last set of cuts is going to be one where I am glued to the freaking television screen. People are asking about the running backs, and we're going to get to those comments, Jaguile56 in particular. But first, we are going to touch on the quarterbacks, because we only had 2 that came out of the game on Saturday. But hey, Brock Purdy looked okay. And the question that I have for you is there any legitimate circumstance where we would have a legit quarterback controversy? How good does Brock Purdy have to be to warrant keeping 3 quarterbacks on this 53-man roster?
Now, I don't think there is a legitimate circumstance where there is a quarterback controversy. My personal belief the entire offseason has been that Nate Sudfeld is the quarterback too, if not for play reasons, for monetary reasons. He's getting paid $2 million, and you don't want to cut him because that $2 million is guaranteed. You don't want to cut him, have him sign. You're essentially paying him to play elsewhere. And the point that I'm going to make about quarterback 2, I don't think there is a quarterback 3 on this team. We'll get to that in a minute, but the 49ers have better players at elsewhere. How often do you think that the 49ers are going to turn to Brock Purdy? If whatever happens, they turn to Brock Purdy and say, we're going to put you in this position and you are going to lead us to the playoffs. If you're going to your quarterback 3, my co-host Marco said this yesterday, if you're going to your quarterback 3, your season is pretty much over. There's not many chances where a quarterback 3 can save a team's roster. Now, Brock Purdy has looked good, but I think there are some concerns still. He doesn't have the arm strength that Nate Sudfeld does have. We saw that on a couple of throws in his first game and in the in training camp. And yesterday, while he did look good, he averaged just 5.6 yards per pass. Sudfeld averaged more with 6 yards. And I honestly think it's Sudfeld's job to lose. I don't think that, while Purdy can play very well, I still don't think that unless Sudfeld completely deteriorates over the last couple of weeks, I think it is Sudfeld's job to lose, just because he's the veteran, has a better understanding of the system, seems fairly calm in the pocket despite having not as much mobility, and then also has the arm strength capable of carrying this offense for a game or 2.
Yeah, I have to agree with you that I just don't think, regardless of what is done in this last preseason game, barring injury, of course, I don't think there's any way that Purdy can unseat Nate Sudfeld as the backup quarterback on this offense. It just doesn't seem likely. To your point, Sudfeld's entire salary is guaranteed. So if you were to keep Purdy instead, now you are paying Sudfeld's salary in addition to Purdy's salary. So he would need to be that much better that you are willing to pay him more to be your backup quarterback and not, in fact, less this season. I look at Sudfeld, and he doesn't wow me with his ability or his arm strength, but he is very capable. That's what I've been left with as an impression of Nate Sudfeld, is he is a capable backup level quarterback within the NFL. And I view this team as set up to win with a backup level quarterback, the type of team that with the defense, improved special teams and stout run game should be able to operate with someone who takes what a defense is willing to give them, checks the ball down, is conservative within the offense, and doesn't turn the ball over. That could be a recipe for success. And if you're only asking Sudfeld to fill in for 2 or 3 games throughout the season, I could see that as being a recipe for success for the 49ers to continue on winning, even if Trey Lance has to miss a couple of games. Do you view it the same way? Do you see Sudfeld as a capable backup?
I do. I don't think that either of these guys are low-end starters. I don't think they're like in that category, right, of the close starters to close backups. But when you look in the NFL and the backups of playoff caliber teams, there aren't many NFL teams where their backup is a top-level quarterback. The only instance where you could point, Jacoby Brissett. And that's because Deshaun Watson, they anticipated a situation would go as it is, maybe even worse. Remember, Jacoby Brissett was signed days after the Cleveland Browns traded for Deshaun Watson. It wasn't the other way around where they were expecting him to back up Baker Mayfield. And just looking at teams, right? The Buffalo Bills, their backup, I believe, is Matt Barkley. The Chiefs with Patrick Mahomes, their backup is Chad Henne. The Chargers with Justin Herbert, I believe their backup is Easton Stick right now. So like just those are a couple of examples, and not many teams as well carry 3 quarterbacks. Looking at last year, I went back, looked at every single team's initial 53-man roster. Only 9 of the 32 teams carried a third quarterback last year, less than 1/3 of the teams. And of those 9 teams, only 3 teams were playoff teams. The Chargers, the Eagles, and the Raiders. And the Eagles traded one of their 3 quarterbacks, Joe Flacco, midseason to the New York Jets. So only 2 of those teams ended actually rostering all 3 quarterbacks on their roster.
This is a fascinating one to keep your eyes on. And I love the point that you just brought up there about how many teams actually carry that third quarterback. Because I saw a similar question that I watched Swansong bring to the table on Twitter there around this idea of like, hey, Kyle Shanahan seems to get into a position. He did it with Nick Mullins and CJ Beathard, where he thinks these guys are too good. I can't let them pass through waivers. I've got to keep these quarterbacks on the roster. And I begin to wonder if you could see a similar circumstance where he says to himself, oh, Brock Purdy is too good. I got to keep 3 quarterbacks because I don't want him to get poached. But when you look at the rest of the league, how many teams out there are willing to even carry a third quarterback at all? And how many of those teams already have their own Brock Purdy who they have their eyes set on, right? Is there actually any NFL team that would come in and swoop up Brock Purdy and carry him on their roster, as you would assume a third quarterback, because he doesn't jump off the page as a suitable backup quarterback in this position? So even if Shanahan is excited by what he sees in Purdy, I think it's a safe bet to gamble and release him, count on the fact that you can bring him back to the practice squad.
I think that that's a fair assessment. And if he does get claimed, I'm not going to front and say there's no chance that he gets claimed. Sure. I think that there is a possibility that he does get claimed, but I also think, he has 4 years on his contract. That could be an added bonus to teams as opposed to the regular 3. But to me, I don't think Purdy gets claimed just based on the remainder of depth charts outside and based on what he's shown. He's shown that he's right now a third string level quarterback. And if you asked this question in 2019, my answer likely would have been different. Or in 2018, when the 49ers, back then when the 49ers carry those 3 quarterbacks, like you said, because the depth on the team wasn't as much. In 2019, This team was a top-heavy team, especially at positions like the defensive line, where they relied on 4 players as opposed to 10 players on that defensive line on a consistent rotation. And so to me, right now, you saw it last year. Jimmy Garoppolo, Trey Lance, and then you had Nate Sudfeld. The 49ers cut Nate Sudfeld and placed him on the practice squad last year because they had so much depth at other positions and understood that the value of a third quarterback is just not as high. It's not worth spending the extra roster spot. Whereas, I'll give an example. Our 6th receiver this year is Malik Turner.
Right.
Malik Turner likely would have a bigger role than Brock Purdy would in the 2022 season and would factor more into San Francisco's success as a 6th receiver. or maybe Jordan Willis, our 10th defensive lineman. He might factor more because if somebody gets injured, he can be a plug and play run defender and get a couple of stops. That's kind of my philosophy on it. And that's why I think, especially with our depth right now, it's a better chance, or it's a better way to build your roster if you cut him and roll with two quarterbacks.
That is well said, that there are other players who could contribute to this roster at a greater clip than you could with a third quarterback. Plus, take comfort. Cheese comes in to say he's quarterback 3. So, if we lose out on Purdy, we've got Cheese. He's going to take it down. Pete Gorman comes in to let us know at one time the 49ers had Joe Montana, Steve Young, and Steve Bono on the same roster. I know, I was there. I witnessed it. It was crazy. Bringing in a couple of super chats here. Flav is talking about quarterbacks, so we're on the same subject. Purdy looks more NFL ready than Lance in every category besides athleticism. Just a natural quarterback. Wish Lance had his accuracy and experience. I don't know that I could go that far in comparing the two. What I would say is minus the athleticism, that Purdy looks extremely impressive for someone who was selected where he was, but I wouldn't go so far as to say that he's above or at Lance's level when it comes to accuracy. Certainly experience, I would give him the nod there. 4-year starter in college, no question. He has more starts. But I'm not sure I'm giving him the nod on everything else. What's your take on Flav's comments here?
Yeah, I don't think so either. I think the arm strength disparity is significant between the two.
Very significant.
If Brock Purdy were to attempt the throws that Trey Lance were attempting, the interception rate of Brock Purdy would be significantly higher just because the ball takes a couple of more seconds to get to the receiver. We saw that on one of the first days of training camp. Brock Purdy tried to throw the ball like across the field, about 40 yards down to a wide open receiver on the play. And Taylor Hawkins streaked from one side of the field to the other side of the field. The ball was in the air for so long and he intercepted the pass. I don't think that Brock Purdy has the arm strength right now. And I also don't think the accuracy reflects, or his accuracy is better. Completion percentage might reflect that. But Brock Purdy also, like I mentioned earlier, he threw for 5.6 yards per attempt. That's a very minimal marking compared to NFL level quarterbacks when you look last year. And Trey Lance, his yards per attempt in training camp, or his yards per attempt in general, would be higher. When you look at the Houston game last year, it was well over 10 yards per attempt, while the accuracy was about 66, 67%. I think if Lance were to attempt those lower throws, the accuracy would obviously increase.
I would agree. And I tend to think that in practice, you've got Kyle Shanahan pushing those things that Trey Lance doesn't do as well because he wants to practice those things. And once we get into the regular season, you are going to see Shanahan revert to things that Trey Lance does very well and try to build around that. I agree. If you saw Purdy taking the same shots that you saw Trey Lance taking, I think the numbers would be different. Certainly going to get to Chris Royal's super chat because it beautifully leads us right into our next topic there. But I do want to bring in this one quick hitter from Kurt Papadakis coming in, sneakerhead here on the channel. He says, Rob, Brock Purdy, Jordan Willis, Quantrez Knight, or Jordan Mills, choose one. I'm guessing that this means choose one to keep on the 53-man roster. You got to cut the others. This is tough for me between Jordan Willis and Quantrez Knight because of the depth along the defensive line and some of the other players that I envision making it there. I'm going to keep Quantrez Knight because I like the depth at nickel corner, at safety. And, again, you're talking about a young player up and coming. So I'm going Quantrez Knight on this one. Who are you taking out of that foursome?
Now, if this question is asking who do I most expect to make the 53-man roster, I would go with Jordan Willis. I think he's the biggest lock of the bunch, and I think he might honestly be the only one to make the 53-man roster. I think the Quantrez Knight pick is interesting because he has safety flexibility and he has played in the nickel as well. And I think if he's to play in a hybrid role, that would suit him well. So if I was ranking these, I would probably put Willis 1, Knight 2. Mills is already 31, so I'd put him last and then Purdy 3. I
like that ranking. It gives us some serious context there. All right, here we go. Flav is following up on this one. So, Chris, still getting to your super chat, but this one is a follow-up before we move to running back. So I feel like we can put a nail in the coffin here. It says, Rob, I feel like if Lance showed what Purdy has in terms of timing and accuracy at any point last year, no fans would be as concerned about him. I think that may be, in my mind, that would be a bit of cherry picking, because if you saw exactly what Purdy has done so far this season, then I would be extremely nervous about what Lance would have done. If we transpose those two, if we say Lance did last year what Purdy is doing this year, if I saw Lance struggling and the ball's hanging up in the air as I do with Purdy, I would be concerned about his ability to make that transition. With Lance, the physical skill sets and the athleticism are what give me confidence that he's going to be able to make it within this league, because it will allow him the time. He clearly possesses the drive, the intellect to be able to pick up these schemes, and his physical skill set should give him the time to acclimate to the NFL while he's going through that learning process. So to me, I'm not concerned about Lance. I get where you're going with this, but I'd be more concerned if I saw a lack of physical skill sets and just the timing and accuracy for Lance. Because I see the other, I'm confident he can build on the latter.
Yeah, I agree. I think that if you talk about, I think fans would revolt even more if Lance was doing what Purdy was doing this offseason. If you saw Lance, because while Purdy has looked good, it's all relative. Purdy has looked good for what your expectations would be for a rookie 7th round pick.
Right.
Purdy, in my opinion, has not looked better than Sudfeld, who is a backup level quarterback. And so if Lance was playing as a 45th best quarterback, let's just say as a number in the NFL, you would not be confident in him as your starter. If he doesn't display the arm strength that Purdy has, if he displays the arm strength that Purdy has, that's not a starting NFL quarterback. The reason, though, that the fans are concerned is obviously because right now, he's the one with the least film on him. And so that in itself will cause worry for a 3rd overall pick. And also because people need to pick on something, because all the other quarterbacks in the draft have been heavily scrutinized. It's just that happened last year when Lance wasn't playing. So now you're seeing all the scrutiny come to Lance this year when everybody else is under the spotlight, but he hasn't seen any action.
Yes, there is no shortage of scrutiny for Lance. That's a fact. Let's transition to that next topic. We got some super chats on it, and it is a hot topic for me as well. And it's around the running back room. It is in regard to whether you've seen enough from Jordan Mason at this point where he belongs in that conversation. It's a crowded room. Want to bring in Chris Royals' super chat here. Chris says, came in late. Sorry if you touched on this. I think Sermon has been the weakest link in the running back room. Do you think we end up cutting him by cut downs? This is a great question here, because you're trying to balance actual output, where if I'm going by output, then Sermon is on the short end of the stick here. I'm not putting Sermon on the 53-man roster if I'm just looking at what they have done in training camp and games to this point. But that's not the only thing in consideration. You are taking into account the fact that he is a 3rd-round pick, and you traded up into the 3rd round to select him. And there was a reason you moved up and had that optimism. And he is a year and a half into his NFL tenure, enough to definitively say that what you saw there isn't there anymore. I don't know. This is going to be, again, probably the most fascinating cut down room for me, because I can't honestly pick who I can't even pick the number of running backs we're going to carry, let alone who they're going to be. Rohan, do you have a sense about it as it is laid out right now?
Hell no. If we're being honest, but let's look at it. Let's take a little bit.
Let's go one by one.
So we have 3 locks in Mitchell, in TDP, and in I think actually you can say 2 locks for now, because Sermon has had a weaker camp. He was originally viewed as the lock, and I don't think he gets cut. I think the film, while it has been discouraging, I don't think it's as bad as people have expected, just because there have been a lack of lanes when Sermon has run at times. And also, he had an ankle injury going into yesterday's game. only played 5 carries, and he only had, I think, 5 carries as well in the game before, or 6 carries, I think, in the game before. There have been several blocking miscues on Sermon runs. He's also shown hesitancy, which has been an issue that has sometimes thwarted him at camp, and when he hasn't been hesitant, he's been good. Based on what I've seen from camp, based on the depth chart and performance, I would say Sermon is still one of the higher running backs on the depth chart. In this week, before his injury on Thursday, he was the top running back without Elijah Mitchell out there. So I think that they have, or at least they have confidence in Sermon. The injury did apply to it. And I think I don't think Mitchell is going this Thursday, which means Sermon is going to be that RB1 again on Thursday with the entire likely first team offense, which Kyle Shanahan normally plays in that final game. So I think Sermon will get a chance, if he's healthy, to prove himself again. But I don't think he gets cut, which makes it even more tougher because, like you said, we've got Jordan Mason, a guy who I've been positioning to make this roster for a couple of months, although Jeff Wilson Jr. has been higher on the pecking order and JaMycal Hasty has looked good in the preseason with explosive runs. It's a tough debate. So I'll ask, before I answer that question, I'll ask you, do you think Jordan Mason makes it? And if so, do you think the 49ers will cut Trey Sermon heading into 2022?
This is, I think, as of right now, my toughest roster prediction as far as just being flummoxed and believing that you could legitimately make a wrong choice here and not knowing which one is the wrong choice. That's the tough thing. So I'll answer those in order. Yes, I think Jordan Mason makes this roster.
We need the siren. We need the horn. Rob Schuh just said his...
I see him as making this roster. What I can't definitively say is, does he make this roster because the 49ers cut, 2 other players that could possibly make this roster, could make an NFL roster, or is it because they expand the running back room to 6 and only keep 5 wide receivers or something along that lines? And I could see a situation like that. And again, why it's so hard for me to predict is when I compare Jeff Wilson Jr. and Jordan Mason, I think, okay, well, Jordan has clearly flashed more in this offseason. He is the younger of the two. Therefore, you would think you would list him as having the higher upside between the two. It doesn't have the extensive injury history that Jeff Wilson Jr. is battling with. But Kyle Shanahan and his staff do love a dog mentality, and Jeff Wilson Jr. goes to that dark place. And so, that's someone that they want to keep in that room. And JaMycal Hasty is the outlier because he's got the different body type and movement style from the other two. So if you're going with a bigger body back and you end up keeping 2, why would you keep Jeff Wilson Jr. and his doppelganger in Jordan Mason in body type? But if you're keeping 2 and you have one that's smaller and shiftier, could you keep JaMycal Hasty as one of those 2? Yeah, absolutely. So I can talk myself into any combination, but the declaration I've made here that I stand by is that Jordan Mason makes the 53-man.
And I think I'll go with the same declaration, but let me say this. Jordan Mason and Jeff Wilson Jr. has been the debate. I don't think if Jordan Mason makes it, I don't think that the guy who gets cut is Trey Sermon, because when you look at it, there's a diversity in these running backs, right? You've got strong physical runners. Tyrion Davis-Price obviously has the acceleration and the power. We see it when he lowers his shoulder. Elijah Mitchell is that guy that can hit the edge. He's he's probably the fastest running back on the team. And while he has durability concerns, he's a guy who has shown that when he's healthy, can take 20 carries in a game. Then you have Trey Sermon, the guy who can work in between the tackles, in between the guards, with shiftiness when he's not indecisive. He's got a little bit of agility to himself, and he's also bulked up this offseason. Or he's stayed kind of in that frame and gotten more acclimated to the system. Now, what are we missing? We're missing a third down back because while Sermon has shown that he can have capable hands, we saw the drop on the other day. He's dropped a couple of passes in preseason. Tyrion Davis-Price does not have great hands at all. He's a good pass blocking back, but he doesn't have great hands. And then Elijah Mitchell, he was pretty good last year. 19 catches, 137 yards. But again, he's a guy who they are utilizing heavily in the first 2 downs. Do you want to continue to overutilize him in that way and risk injury? So you want a solidified third down back, and that's where Jeff Wilson Jr. has come in over the past couple of seasons. Especially in 2020, he was seen as a receiver, and he's also seen as a guy who can take the brunt of the role when guys get injured, like in 2020, when he had 126 carries for 600 yards. But Jordan Mason enters the picture. Jordan Mason is a guy who already shows that he's NFL ready. He has great vision and really great speed for his size, while also showing the physicality. The way that he cuts is very good. And he also has shown, not necessarily in the preseason games, but in training camp practice, he's shown capable of being a receiver, a good route runner, and a guy with good hands. He hasn't dropped a pass all preseason, and he's also been seen running on the outside, not only out of the backfield. Now, I think the debate is between them two. And to me, I pick Mason because you have 3 more years of team control with Jordan Mason, whereas Jeff Wilson Jr. is a 26-year-old entering free agency once again next year. Jordan Mason, with those 3 years, you know how Kyle Shanahan's able to utilize running backs. I think that that's super important. And I think those 3 years help you keep consistency in this running back room, whereas instead of you having to recycle running backs every single year.
I love that prediction, and I think that you have given a reasonable backup to your opinion there, a reasonable set of circumstances that play out such that you have Mason making that 53-man roster. And I agree. I think the talent speaks for itself. I might build it out a little bit different. I might keep that 5th running back in addition to Juice, just based on the injury history for this team and not wanting Jeff Wilson Jr. to end up in Arizona or Seattle. You know, one of those teams would come in to poach him. Come on Friday came in with another super chat pointing out Sermon needs the starting offensive line. He's been good in practice. And I have heard great things about Sermon in practice. And I believe that you have reported as much as well. And we are looking at a circumstance where he's set up to get those snaps on Thursday in the final preseason game, where we get one last shot to see how Trey Sermon can look in front of not necessarily the starting 5, but more of the starting line than we had in there in the previous games where Sermon had snaps. All right, let's get into our last topic here. Everybody got excited about the running back topic, and I wish we had more time to go through all the comments because people have their opinions on the running backs, and I don't blame them. It's a fired up room. And by the way, while we're here going into the last topic, all of Rohan's information is down below. You can follow him on Twitter. You can subscribe on YouTube. Rohan is doing phenomenal work throughout the 49ers offseason, headed into the regular season, got a new gig coming up. Very exciting. All of that is down in the description below. And go ahead and hit that like button on this video before you head out. All right, this is the one we're closing out on. It's a quick hitter. And it is my question to you. Do you believe there's any chance Drake Jackson does enough in the remaining time available for him to start opposite of Bosa? Let's say just in the early part of the season, maybe not week 1, but in the first quarter of the season. D'Amico said today, you earn the right to pass rush the passer by stopping the run. And he's done that in speaking about Drake Jackson. Do you think he continues to do it enough such that we see him opposite of Bosa in the first quarter of the season?
I don't think so. I think Drake Jackson has had a great camp. He's a great athlete, shown great, he's an agile guy. He can really get to the passer at times, and he has pure speed. He also has shown the ability to stop the run. He showed that more in this last game. But Samson Ebukam, in my opinion, is a lock to start at that position just because the 49ers benched him this past day because they have confidence in him. Like Swanson says, Ebukam is probably more trusted, and that's true. The starting offensive line or defensive line has not wavered this offseason. It's been Ebukam and Bosa when they are out there healthy. And even after that, Jackson hasn't always been that second guy. Kamoko Toure has been there. Charles Omenihu has been there. And then comes Drake Jackson. Drake Jackson has definitely had a showcase or a hell of a preseason, really. Showcased his talents. But I think still he's fairly raw as a pass rusher. He utilizes more of his traits than necessarily moves. I think he is a good pass rusher right now. But I think he's still fairly raw. And as a run defender, I think he might need to get a little stronger, bulk up a little more, whereas he can then be that future, that solidified guy, because Samson Ebukam is on a 1-year deal. He is likely to get a payday if he continues to perform like he did at the end of last year, likely to get a payday. Now, the one thing I'll say additionally to this is Ebukam got, I think, 50% or 51% of the defensive snaps that last year. I don't know if that number remains that high.
Right.
because I think that Ebukam as a third down guy, they're going to want to keep him fresh and take him maybe off third downs more than expected because there are better pass rushers on the edge. Remember, Arden Key played primarily on the inside following week 8. That's where he was. Omenahue will likely play on the inside, but you now have Toure and Jackson where you want to probably keep either one or two of them on third downs, which is where Samson Ebukam's snap count might decrease a little more.
That's a great way to point out that Samson Ebukam does still probably lock in as that starter. And I agree that he has that firmly locked down as of this moment. Come on Friday, coming in to say Bosa, Armstead, Javon Kinlaw, and Jackson, firm starters, in my opinion. I would say Ebukam is the firm starter opposite of Bosa there. So in disagreement a little bit with come on Friday there, but I agree that when you talk about the total number of snaps, this is finally a season where it seems like the platooning of defensive linemen will be in full effect, that the depth of this defensive line is unmatched with anything I have ever seen. When you look at the depth of the edge rushers in particular, starting caliber players on the third level of this team. And so you would assume Chris Kocurek is going to attempt to keep them rested and coming in waves. And therefore you will see pass rush specialists coming in where Drake Jackson could get the opportunity to grab some early snaps and earn more playing time if he does well with those initial snaps. Rohan, I know that you have a show coming up, so we are going to get going here, but thank you so much for being a part of the program today. An absolute pleasure having you on.
Hey, appreciate you as always, Rob. Appreciate the chat even more. They were great today. And yeah, always love talking with you. Great show. And yeah, definitely excited for the season. We've got almost 2 weeks, 3 weeks now, and then we got real football come through.
It is almost real football. I'll be there in Chicago. Very much looking forward to that. I believe you are on with Jay coming up on the Last Second Sports coming up there. Going to be very exciting. I look forward to it. And I will be back on tomorrow with the mailbag. Get your questions in at 49ersmailbag@gmail.com or look out on Twitter for that ask and get those questions in. I will see you tomorrow at 5 p.m. for the mailbag. And I will be tuning in to Last Second Sports to watch a little bit more Niners coverage in just a moment. Until then, cheers, faithful.